for the go live. Hey, we're live. Welcome to Heaven's Help Desk, where you ask questions and we give the answers that we think heaven would give if you ask that question to them. My name is Curtis Childs. I'll be your host, and I got a really phenomenal panel of experts here with me today to help answer these questions. Panel, jump up on the screen. Say hello.
Hello there. Hi, everybody. Happy Friday.
Great to be with you.
You know who we are because we have these little things that tell you.
Right.
I don't need to say a word. The questions we're going to answer today, and if you're brand new to this is we're pulling from the spiritual experiences of Emanuel Swedenborg, which is I believe the most comprehensive explanation of how everything works, including afterlife, that's available anywhere. And the questions you'll see today are from members. So those are people who are supporting this not-for-profit Swedenborg Foundation that does this programming. So thanks to members. And if you want to get your question in here, become a member and support us today. All right, we're going to get to some questions. I do want to say something super exciting. Merchandise dropped. This is Secrets of Heaven Volume 10. This is a brand new translation. Jonathan's team's been working on this. It's available for pre-order now. There's you want Heaven's Help Desk? You want to know what heaven would say about things? Check this book out. All proceeds benefit the not-for-profit Swedenborg Foundation, but hopefully the material in there benefits the human race. I mean, that's the idea. All right, let's get to our first question. This is from CJ, who asks, OBE/NDE, which is out-of-body experience, near-death experience, first-hand experiences, thousands of accounts have been documented nowadays, have reported being fully lucid and aware in the unusual state of, quote, between embodiment states of awareness. Some have reported being completely aware of being in the DNA spiral helix. The descriptions they give of the layout, structure, who, what is there, and what is going on, I myself consider the accounts to be undeniable. They were aware in the DNA spiral helix. What if most of the events and conditions are the management of this condition? That human beings continue as elemental lives in the DNA spiral, the real estate they earn based on just desserts. Perhaps it is the very structure that mankind is matrixed into and managed by means of. If you haven't watched this before, there's a character limit on this bubble here. So I read the whole question. You get the summary of it here. So DNA, do spirits go inside DNA? What's going on with that? Great question, CJ. What do you think, Karin and Jonathan?
I can kick off some thoughts. In Swedenborg's day, if I'm not mistaken, DNA was not known about. Is that correct?
Watson and Crick, right? In the 50s, figured that out.
That's right.
And their assistant, they ripped off their assistant or something that she'd really found it. Who knows? Okay.
Right. So, of course, Swedenborg wouldn't be mentioning DNA helixes or anything like that. But the marvelous thing is, he did say tons about how the whole spiritual world is set up like the human body. And I was just reading some descriptions in his spiritual diary of observing these certain kinds of spirits, people in the afterlife, who were zipping around in a way that he realized they were in he calls it the grand human, the whole spiritual world, the whole heaven is functionally in the form of a human being, and all the relationships between the communities, like relationships between parts of the body. And these spirits were moving around like certain fluids in the brain do. You know, I can't retain what he said because he was getting all technical about the brain. But they were just acting just like the parts in the body did, that they were, corresponding to or a part of in the grand human. And so, no doubt, there are spirits and places in the spiritual world that are the DNA of the grand human. And of course, in NDEs, people see what makes sense to them. So nowadays, there would be more like that kind of an experience could happen for people who know about DNA. And the thing that maybe relates to that in things that Swedenborg did describe, he described a lot of helixes and gyres, the spiraling motion. So I wonder if there's a connection there. And I noticed a couple of the phrases in CJ's question really stood out to me. One was the real estate they earn based on just desserts, which seems to be related to what Swedenborg says is like where you end up and the environment in the spiritual world that you come into is a result of the kind of life you chose and lived and what you're interested in and what you care about. And then one other phrase, the very structure that mankind is matrixed into and managed by means of, which to me sounds like the divine design that manages all things. So those were a couple of things that I just could relate to some ideas in my mind from Swedenborg's books.
Yeah, I love that. And Swedenborg, although they hadn't discovered, as you say, the shape of the helix of DNA, he was very big on helixes and spirals. He talks quite a lot about spirals. And he also talks about gyres, Gyres, which are these spiral-like shapes. I think even before his spiritual eyes were open, he was writing about spirals and those sorts of shapes as a really fundamental. It's what the Earth does as it goes through space and so on. So it is kind of a basic shape. But something that he says is really fascinating to me is that in both Divine Love and Wisdom and Divine Providence, his theological works, he says that regeneration is actually, he says that our minds have organic structures, quote unquote, whatever that means. We have organic structures in there, and that there are spirals in there, and that regeneration is a matter of getting your spiral to go in the opposite direction. Not that we do that ourselves, but he actually says that some of the spirals are open at the bottom but closed at the top, and you want it to be the other way around, where it's closed at the bottom and open at the top. And says that regeneration is actually an organic change, quote unquote. It almost sounds like your DNA rewraps or some spiritual version of that. But it's pretty amazing that he would be writing all that about spirals and about spirals being really fundamental to these shapes within our brains and bodies. And even the added idea of reversing spirals hundreds of years before DNA is discovered. So it's kind of a cool connection and sort of amazing to wonder. I don't know if anybody's studied that, but do people who get really heavenly in this life, do you test their DNA and it goes the other way around or something? I don't know, but it's a cool idea.
Yeah, man. That another thing that struck me about what CJ was saying is he's asking about, would you live, if you lived a certain way in your life, would that put you inside the DNA, wherever the DNA exists? Like if you think space and time, right. You think, what do you mean in someone's individual cell? But if you think outside space and time, you just like wherever the mothership is, I was just reading before this started, just to like get in the zone, some of Swedenborg's Secrets of Heaven Volume 2, and actually there's something there that applies. It says, all souls and spirits whatsoever from the beginning of creation appear in their own position at all times and never change place except when conditions inside them change. And what he means is the same place inside the grand human. So even though you can go around and you sort of where you appear changes, you have an essential home base that is in some part of this big human form. So plenty of people's home base would be inside the DNA inside of each cell. And that is like conditions inside you change, and that's what changes where you are. So that would be the living and the just desserts and everything. Yeah, Jonathan.
Yeah, just an additional thought that inspires. He says that of these three heavens, he says the heavens are divided sort of vertically into three levels, and that highest level is about purposes. The middle level is about the means of achieving those purposes, and then the lowest heaven is about results, action, and so on. Well, DNA is totally about purpose, isn't it? It's the thing that guides everything else. Isn't it the code that makes everything what it is? Maybe that's the highest heaven,
Yeah.
That's so cool. I remember on the show where we were talking about these spirals going, one direction, then it's evil. But if you switch them around to go the other direction, then that's goodness. And then also just thinking about the spiritual DNA of the human race. We talk about DNA sort of determining our physical selves and stuff, but there's spiritual DNA too, and that can change over time as people make different choices, and like even the heredity will change in the future, says Swedenborg. So cool.
Awesome. Thanks for the question, CJ. Before we get to the next one, I want to draw your attention to there's a link to swedenborg.com/livegive. That's a way that you can make a donation to support the not-for-profit Swedenborg Foundation. It's how we do things like translate Swedenborg's books, put out content like this and everything else to try to get the message out. So that is a way to make a tax-deductible gift. Thank you so much. Question number 2, Mary Valentine, who asks, I would like to understand why Swedenborg says that profanation is the worst of all sins. I suppose the intention behind profanation has to be the worst possible and the most evil because of the seriousness of the consequences. Is this correct? I feel like, so there's this thing Swedenborg talks about called profanation. And I feel like every time it gets talked about, people worry that, that they did it and they're going to be in trouble because they had. So you didn't. I mean, if you're worried about it, being in a state of profanation is like, you wouldn't be worrying about whether you do. So I just like my summary as I understand it is profanation is the mixing of good and evil. And particularly like if you become good and start living by good spiritual things, and then later you say, never mind, I want to go into evil things, that causes this mingling of those two. Let me know if this is right, Karen and Jonathan. And I don't know if it's the most evil, meaning there's certainly seems like there's things that harm people more, but it's like the most difficult to untangle the effects on you of that because you're mixing up good and evil together in yourself. It's just very, very laborious process to try to disentangle that stuff. So what do you think?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that, the worst of all evils doesn't mean like you have been the baddest. It's like a spiritual physics thing. There's this mixing that makes it very difficult. And I want to add in that, right, people get worried, like, did I profane? But it has to involve malicious intent. You can't just sort of get grumpy about your, oh, I don't know if I believe that, or, that's how some people read it. Like, I believe this and now I don't think I do. Did I profane? No. It involves malicious intent, mixing in a sense of you learned truths and you purposely use them to do harm to others, like, or to get power for yourself or to get domination over people. So you are using the tools of truth to pursue evil things. And the reason that's such a toxic mixture inside of you is those are the very tools that are there to help you get to heaven. And if you're using those tools to do evil, like you've kind of sabotaged your own purification system in a sense. And it's going to be harder. Like, it's not that the Lord can't do it. I'm really struck by, there's like 3 chapters in a row or something in I think it's Leviticus about leprosy, treating and dealing with leprosy, that Swedenborg says that corresponds to profanation. And I'm just fascinated that there's all these verses about, if it's this, do this. If it's this, oh, we can't cure that. But with this, we can cure. And like, I'm just thinking, wow, this is all about like how to deal with profanation. And Swedenborg does say there's different levels of profanation. Like there's some that can more easily be, remedied, and some that are much harder. But this quote, Secrets of Heaven 8882, to me seems to be just talking about why it's a mess, why it's a toxic mess, and the worst in the sense of, oh boy, you've mixed things so thoroughly that this is going to be really hard to remedy. And anything can only be remedied anyway if you want it to be remedied. So this says, when this happens, this mixture, heavenly things become combined with infernal things. So heavenly ideas with infernal motivations. This combination cannot be dissolved and thereby the person restored to wholeness, except through a process that completely deprives that person of spiritual life. So it's almost like you have to, because if you've so tangled it up with your will, which is your life, which is to do harm, and you've tangled these, mixed these ideas with this intent to dominate and have control and greed, it's just like that. It almost has to, like, your chosen life has to kind of burn out to a point that you become very passive in order to sort of rebuild something. So it's a serious mess. that's something to avoid. We had a show about the second commandment where we dug into this a bit and compared it to the warning on a bleach bottle that says, do not mix this with ammonia because it will create a hazardous thing. And we reworded that to be profanation, is saying, do not mix holy things with evil purposes. To do so will create a hazardous and toxic state of mind. And so it's this warning, like Ben Franklin said, an ounce of prevention, whatever, I can't remember the thing, but just like, if you realize, like, don't do that. Don't take, this religious idea, I can use that to get power. Don't do it. It's making a mess for yourself.
Yeah, that's great. And there's, as Karen mentioned, there's, Swedenborg talks about 7 levels. He talks about it in Divine Providence. And some of them are fairly mild, and then they get more and more and more and more serious. And the most serious is if you really got, it's not just talking about sort of experimenting with different ideas when you're young or something. It's talking about if you really were all in, like, I'm in, I love this, and then deliberately jumped off the bus and got on the hell bus or something. And one of the reasons that that's so bad is that basically there's a process that goes on after we die. I don't know quite how to reconcile it with other things that Swedenborg says, because even the angels still have sort of hereditary evils, or they still have stuff in them. But there's some sort of cleansing process where if you're good, evil things are removed from you, because you could not be in heaven with those things being there. And if you're evil, good things are removed from you, because you couldn't be in, the other people in hell could not stand the, Swedenborg actually says you would smell bad to the other in either place. If you're in heaven and you've got evil on you, you're going to smell bad. If you're in hell and you got good on you, you're going to smell bad. And if those two things have been so woven together by your own deliberate, and by the way, Swedenborg says that there are huge safeguards. The Lord tries everything possible to prevent this from ever happening, because it's a horrible outcome. So you really have to put your heart into it. If you're gonna go for it, go all in. But if those things are so interwoven from these choices, opposite choices that you've made, and welded them together so they're the same kind of delight in you, the only way is to cut that whole thing out. So it's almost like, well, we can do it, but we'll have to remove your brain stem and your spinal column.
Yeah, right.
It's the only way to get rid of it.
Yeah. And it is very different than just doubts or fluctuations that you're trying to figure out. It's not that. It's not that. Yeah. So no worries.
All right. But thanks for the question. And I saw during that, Janone gave 5 memberships. So thanks so much for donating that. Okay. Next one, Q3. This is from Fred Brackman, who asks, when Swedenborg talks about the church and how the church at the end of a church era was vastated and ceased to exist, as an example, at the end of the most ancient church, what happened to people who were not part of that church? Or was all of mankind considered as being part of the church? In case you don't have some background on that, Swedenborg will use the term church in a lot of different ways, but the way that it's being talked about here is sort of a religious era for the human race. So the most ancient church was not one single church organization, but it was a grouping of peoples that had something in common spiritually. So yeah, what happens is it everyone in the church of any given era, or what goes on there? Yeah.
Just a few starting thoughts. With every church era, there are always Gentiles, so to speak. Like there's sort of a central state of mind of people like engaged with the written revelation of that time, or, that are really into it, and then there's people that are not as engaged. And it's interesting to me that whenever it's time for a spiritual era to end, a church to end, and a new one to begin, my understanding is it tends to start with the Gentiles, because they weren't all in to this old way of thinking, and they're a little more open, and that can help them, be the soil that the new ideas are planted in, maybe a little more easily than those who had really embraced the old ideas. So yeah, I guess that's just my starting thoughts, that there are people that are more central in a church, and people that are not thinking as much about it or not accepting that, but they can be part of a next phase. So what do you guys think?
Yeah, I think Swedenborg talks about the church, and he uses church in a number of different ways. And so this is just one way about these grand religious eras, where there's some group that's sort of more central to heaven. That's how heaven's connecting with the human race. And then other people are more at the periphery of that. But there's two kinds, there's a visible kind, like in Swedenborg's time, the visible kind was the Christianity of his day, where people had the Bible and they know the name of Jesus and all that. That was sort of the visible kind. But Swedenborg's very clear, and says this over and over again, that he doesn't use the term invisible, but there were good people everywhere. The Lord's actual church is everybody who's being a good person everywhere, from any kind of background, whatever they grew up with, or whatever their faith is. And so it's an interesting question. So I think he's talking about that more visible kind, going through some sort of a staggering, where it's sort of like the end of empires, isn't it? Where you had the Roman Empire, and you have the British Empire, and you have these different empires, they rise and fall. And when that central visible thing collapses and can't do the job anymore, it gets kind of intense in the spiritual world, apparently. But there are always, first of all, the Lord always intervenes before it gets to total darkness. So there's always still good people around. And there's always people all over the world who are living good lives. And so the Lord ensures that whole thing continues, while this kind of central connection shifts over to, okay, now we're going to connect to this next group.
Yeah, you got to have people outside of the church, because you need to have the place where it can next take root. And that's an interesting point that he'll talk about. For example, the ancient church is the era that succeeded the most ancient church, which was in Fred's question. The ancient church, he pins it to a particular location on the globe. He talks about it being the countries of the sort of Fertile Crescent area, that I guess we would now call the Near East, Middle East. And that even though there was a lot of different religious practices there, they were all part of this most ancient church. So, and yeah, later he says that things like Christianity was the church. But then also, you're right. He says the Lord's church is everywhere, with anyone on the whole globe who practices their religion out of a good heart. But I guess that's not the kind that comes to an end and has this specific connection, because that's just a constant. There's just a constant. Everybody who's living rightly by what they believe is this church. But then, yeah, there's this central function of it, which is with people who have some kind of direct revelation. Doesn't even necessarily mean those people understand the revelation that they have. He talks about the Israelites not really understanding why they needed to do the things they did, like why they needed to array around the tabernacle like they did, and not even necessarily having good motives for doing it, but that still got the job done because it still created the correspondences that allowed this certain crucial connection of heaven to earth. So fascinating stuff. Do you want to
Can I
wrap it
quick
up?
add one more thing? Yeah, you've made me think of, he definitely, in the one way of talking about church, connects it with those who have the word of the time, like the version of
Right.
the word, because there is something about the word as defined by Swedenborg, which is just this divine truth that has to exist somewhere on the globe in order to keep a connection between heaven and earth when humanity's minds aren't so pure. And so when it's more, when that group with that revelation it's not doing the job anymore, then that has to end and a new one begin. And that usually starts with Gentiles. But yeah, also there's this constant church of good people that endures across it.
All right, let's go to the next one. Thanks, Fred, for the question. Question number 4 is Kathy, who asks, from Swedenborg's writings, this marriage is what angels perceive when Jesus Christ is mentioned, and it is what is meant by the statement that there is no salvation in any other name. It is also what the Lord meant by the things he said about his name so many times. In John, for instance, whatever you ask in my name, I will do it. So, does this mean that you don't have to be a Christian to go to heaven, but you do have to have a marriage of goodness and truth guiding your life? What do you think, Jonathan?
I think you at least, I think that's absolutely right. You don't have to be a Christian to go to heaven. Anybody who's connecting with the divine is actually connecting with the Lord, because that's who God is. But you don't, the name, the physical name, those syllables don't matter, and to the degree that some people think that they do. And I don't even think you necessarily, I mean, to go to heaven, yes, you have to have a marriage of goodness and truth. To be on the way to heaven, you just have to be working on it. It's very interesting to me that the whole biblical story, like in the book of Revelation, it's all building up to this wedding scene that's going to happen between the Lord or the Lamb and the bride. And then the movie ends and the wedding hasn't taken place yet. It's just about to take place. And Swedenborg says, interestingly, that that marriage of goodness and truth, which may be a very strange concept. I mean, it's taken me a long time to sort of begin to wrap my head around what he's talking about. But that the engagement is a very, very long engagement. Actually, the Lord postpones the union of those two as long as possible, like a lifelong engagement. And then, so if you're headed in that direction, if you're engaged, then, those things can get married and then you'll go to heaven. But yes, that is what needs to come together. That is the heavenly state, to have those two things working together.
Oh, I love that. And Jonathan, you've made me think about how the end of the book of Revelation is the bride that's coming down. And this is cause of great celebration. But a bride who's not yet a wife is the desire for that union, right? And then the wife is when the union has happened. So, right, what we just need to be working on is developing that desire for that marriage of goodness and truth as best we can. And I love what Kathy's brought up, that name, Jesus Christ, is it's not that you have to say it out loud or believe in the being of Jesus Christ as understood by Christianity, but you have to be pursuing that marriage of goodness and truth within yourself, and that is connecting with heaven and bringing you to the Lord in heaven.
Excellent. Great question. Thanks, Kathy. Let's, before we go to the next question, I just want to put a plug in that on Monday, we got a new episode of the podcast coming out. And this one is about, wow, look at that. I'm shocked about something. This episode is about how the Bible has a secret meaning to it. This is, I mean, you saw me showing that book, Secrets of Heaven. That's was sort of Swedenborg's main thing that he was shown, is that there's deeper meaning inside the book. And so we're looking at what that meaning is and how you use it. So check that out on Monday. Great. Or if you're watching this later, it might already be there. Go check out our channel. All right. Question number 5. Brambella asks, could you speak about polygamy and Swedenborg's view of marriage? Not just earthly marriage, but all the forms of marriage. Marriage in heaven, as well as aspects like the marriage of love and wisdom, etc. Here on earth, some people really think polygamy is a spiritual path, and it is certainly in the Bible. Thank you so much. It's true. You don't really, I don't know if you think about that much, but Old Testament's like everybody's got multiple partners. Solomon's got hundreds, and he's supposed to be one of the greatest guys. So what's going on with that? And I think there's sort of actually a nuanced picture. There's a quick answer, and then there's a little more nuance, I would think. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Oh, go.
No, you go ahead.
Yeah, just it's great that through Swedenborg, what he presents is there are ideals and then there are permissions, because we're we're an imperfect race, the human race. So monogamy is absolutely the way it is supposed to be. And from what I understand, even with in our minds, like there are places where I believe Swedenborg is saying for every good feeling, there's a truth that goes with it. And for every true idea, there's a feeling that, a kind of goodness that goes with it. So monogamy between people is the ideal. That's, the way God has intended it. But there are permissions about polygamy. And there were even Swedenborg describing one area of the Muslim heaven, for instance, in his time, where polygamy was permitted because that was so much a part of their culture. It's not ideal. There were higher angels that didn't like that atmosphere. But in the Bible, for instance, was permitted. Whenever there's permissions, it's for the sake of avoiding something worse from God. And I can recall Swedenborg talking about things like that permitted as a better alternative to promiscuity. So promiscuity is just like, there's no commitment at all. There's just, pursuing self-gratification and then discarding people. So polygamy is at least some level of commitment. It's not the ideal, but it was permitted in certain cultures and at certain times to avoid something worse. And then also, I think I had one more thought. Oh, it's just interesting to me that, yes, in the Bible, but you start out with, Abraham, okay, he did took on Hagar, but technically he had one wife, and so did Isaac, and then you come to Jacob, and it starts to be more wives and things like that. So it seemed to be sort of a little bit of a going downhill with marriage there and trying to bring it back up. So there's some thoughts.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and it's interesting that it seems to be based on the religion, the culture, and the laws in certain nations or kingdoms, that if people have lived in a religion where that was part of the religion, then there will be a heaven for that has those characteristics. And yet Swedenborg's quite clear that does not fly in the Christian heaven. From the beginning, with the way Jesus set it up, the Christian world has been monogamous, and so that's interesting, just the effect of the culture or the religious laws and so on from different groups. And he says that there are people in a relatively external heaven, Muslim heaven, where it's polygamy, but if they choose, apparently there must be some sort of information, you get a leaflet or something that says that monogamy would be preferable, and some people opt for that, and when they do, they go to a higher heaven that's still a Muslim heaven, but it's a monogamous Muslim heaven or something. That should be enough to offend anyone, I think. The the other thing I wanted to say was that I've thought a lot about this. Like as you said, Karin, about the goodness and truth, that's definitely the sort of the root of it. Why that monogamy. But I've also thought, and this is just my own thoughts, this isn't something Swedenborg says per se, but that being married to one person is plenty, meaning that there's a whole world inside a person, and that actually if one person is married to several other partners, the way things work, this is the way Swedenborg describes everything works in heaven, in groups and so on, is that they all turn into one human form. So if you had 8 spouses, they would become just parts. It would make each one smaller because they would become parts of just one collective. So actually the way to have the largest sort of interaction, the largest relationship, ironically, is to be committed to one rather than many, because many just shrinks, because there's an essential oneness that wants to happen. I don't know if that makes a lick of sense, but it's a thought that occurred to me.
I get it. I never thought of that before, but yeah, like there's more inside. It's sort of like that's when it can begin, because there's a uniting of minds that characterizes marriage, and you can't have that uniting of minds if there's an imbalance or fascinating.
Can I add to that? That is fascinating, because if you're trying to spread your marital attention out to multiple people, you can't embark on that amazing journey of uniting these two minds forever. Like that keeps getting deeper and deeper. That can only happen when it's one person.
I would imagine it would have the tendency that one would be driven into this is the one that I connect with about this aspect. This is the one I connect with about that. Like it'll diminish. People will take on roles or something rather than a whole person.
Yeah, so it divides you rather than makes you more and more yourself or something.
Thanks for the question, Brambella. That's a great one. Next is Chinonye, who asks, greetings to the Swedenborg Foundation, our amazing panelists, Curtis and team. Hello, Chinonye. My question is this: how do I coexist with people who hate and hurt me without being resentful toward them, especially if the said persons are very close to me and constantly want to destroy my peace? How do I fight the negative feelings? Thank you. Tough one, but let's see what comes to mind. Yeah,
I just have a quick early response, which is, I think the only appropriate response is to go into the fetal position and sob for a few hours. For me, I'm just saying that makes me very sad that you're in that situation. However, I think of Psalm 23 that says the Lord prepares a table before us in the presence of our enemies, and I always would have rather had a table with the absence of enemies, but there's something about enemies that can up our game. But that's, to me, the hardest spiritual work is to pray for those who are spitefully using you and persecuting you and so on. Very, very difficult work, but eventually prayer has sometimes gotten my heart into a more understanding, more divine perspective on what's going on. One thought that's come to mind is just seeing people as eternal, and this is a phase that they're going through, but the Lord absolutely loves them, and there's a long game the Lord is playing, and so they may be a wreck right now, just as we all are a wreck at one time or another. But what a hard thing for you to go through. I wish it weren't like that.
Yeah, think about something that might be encouraging or give some perspective is the life of Jesus model in all these mystical ways that we can grasp maybe some of. he was constantly being mistreated by people that he loved, because he loved everyone. He loved the whole human race, and yet uh, the Pharisees hated him. The Romans crucified him. Even his own disciples were denying him, and that was just part of it. It was that he was having to say, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." So I'm not saying that we should all put up with that for our whole lives or anything, but I guess there's an element of life that is that, which is that's even what God himself went through when he was here. We can look to that for some inspiration.
Yes, yes, beautifully said, both of you. What I'll add is Janonye, it's just so difficult when it's much easier when it's acquaintances or, people you're not living closely with or interacting closely with. It's the most challenging thing, dysfunction within your own household or family. And I think, thinking about the way that Swedenborg talked about the different ways to love the neighbor, it involves, healthy boundaries for yourself. I know that if I'm in situations where and this is it's so delicate because it has to depend on your situation and the particular elements, but I've noticed that more resentment builds up in me if I don't speak up about something. Like it again, situations, but maybe the person isn't as aware as you think of what they're doing is harmful or something like that. So sometimes without anger, as best you can or whatever, to set some boundaries, or like that's not okay for you to speak to me like that, or who knows what it is in your situations, but just to have some healthy boundaries can be a form of loving those people, because it's not loving to let people abuse you. So I don't know.
Yeah, and look what she's saying there. Like, how do I not be resentful towards them? Well, one way that you not be resentful is to, you take some steps to let them know what's going on, or if it's right in the safe situation. But I do know that things that you don't get to do something about can build that resentment even farther. In true Christianity, he talks about how you can even deliver an adversary to a judge, and you're still doing that on the strength of charity if you maintain the intention of becoming their friend once they come to their senses. So that's an extreme example, but there is something to part of love can look like externally. I need to protect myself and protect people, and internally, which is what you're asking about, that can help me with the dealing with the resentment and those kinds of things in a sort of higher minded way.
Yeah, agreed. And it's like any form of loving the neighbor, it's complicated, and it's because you have to keep I would say do a lot of praying, which I know you already do, Chinonya. Just a lot of prayer for guidance in every situation. Just do the best you can. You kind of learn as you go, but a combination of having building up some healthy boundaries, and if to whatever extent you can establish that no, that you can't say that to me or do that to me, or if it's not something you can do about it, call upon those tools that Jonathan and Curtis both referred to, of just like consider that their eternal journey, they're a work in progress, they're being used by the hells right in that moment when they did something hurtful. Curtis's show from a while back called 3 Simple Ways to Love Everyone has some good things, like consider their background. Maybe they never got these, learned how to behave well in this area. Not taking it personally sometimes is very important. Sometimes it feels personal, but it's not about you. It's like they're just lashing out because you're there, but it's not really about you. So it's a complex journey, but just keep calling upon the Lord and doing the best you can. And you will be learning as you go. But yeah, very difficult situation.
Thanks, and yeah, thanks for asking. And this show is not medical advice. We can't know like the nuances of your situation. We hope we can give you some inspiration or food for thought. But that's all we can do. But thank you for asking. Let's go to the next question. This is from Fred again, Fred Brockman, who asks, "It seems that Swedenborg's message has only been available to a relatively small portion of humanity. I realize that no one is lost for not knowing the truth or ever having heard it as given by Swedenborg. Why is the Lord sharing the truth in this manner?" I think you get anyone who really gets into Swedenborg, and I just mean you start to read it in depth and think, dude, this is really good. This is really great. You come up against that, which is, why didn't this take? Why didn't this catch on? And if it's really as high octane truth as it seems to be, you would think that the divine would have a vested interest in making that more available to more people. So, yeah, what's going on with that, Karin? I saw your hand up.
Yeah, to me, it helps to just remember that Jesus's message started out with a very small reach. Like it took a while to grow, and because new ideas, new spiritual ideas, any new ideas, but especially spiritual ideas, it's only effective and lasting if one person at a time takes them in, reflects on them, decides for themselves. And that's a slow process. We those of us who love these teachings would love, like, everybody they just get it right away and everything. But that's just not how things become a part of people's heart, a part of people's will, a part of people's life. So, looking at it, it took a while for Jesus's message to build and gradually spread. Swedenborg's messages are actually, to begin with, more readily available than Jesus's were, just because there was the printing press and now there's the internet, and it is growing. But so it's not about whether they're readily available today, but it's about people's receptiveness. Every individual's, do they want this or not? And is it resonating or not? And that's something that can't be forced. So if we just think about, like, the Lord's working on it in the absolute best way, it's hard to be patient about that when you feel like this could heal the world, which I do feel. But I need to go back to that trust that the Lord's doing it in the most effective way, not the fastest, but the most effective.
Yes, great point. And Swedenborg talks about John the Baptist and what it means that John the Baptist was kind of a wild man wearing hairy clothing, a leather belt, and eating locusts and wild honey. And people have to leave the cities and the villages to go out into the wilderness to see this John the Baptist. And what it means spiritually is that is the way that truth is perceived by that culture. The truth is perceived as very non-mainstream. It's very wacky, weirdo. It's from somewhere else, sort of a fringe thing. When the Lord asks, "What did you go out of the wilderness to see?" Person wearing soft clothes, what did you go out in the wilderness to see? And Swedenborg's analysis of that, he says that about John the Baptist, says that actually the truth that John represents should have been in some royal palace in silk clothes, but it was dressed that way because that's how people saw it, as being marginalized. And so I've never thought about it until your question, but is there something to the fact that, that's the way the truth always comes out by the river where nobody lives, kind of thing. It doesn't come mainstream. It's not broadcast on network television or something. It comes in from the side. Just a thought.
Yeah, and you never know, like, I often wonder, what's the purpose and function of Swedenborg's books in particular? You'd think that there's some good big purpose and function to them, because I think that they are so good. Then there's a couple of scenarios that I could see plausibly. I think they definitely are made to be the basis of an important part of like the church on earth, meaning like the universal gods set up all the different religions and things, and so I think Swedenborg is going to be a part of that, because there's going to be a certain number of people that are really lit up by it, and I think develop pretty good understanding of what's real and what's good and true, and form some potent spirituality. That I don't know if, like, ultimately, we talked about how heaven and so the church and so everything is in the human form. If Swedenborg is just like the pineal gland, like he's some important little gland that's going to always, there's only going to be a limited number of people that are into that, but it does something big for the body. It creates these hormones for the whole body. Could be that's what it is. Could be it's going to grow and become much more directly influential, or it could be, I know that Swedenborg has had a massive impact on a lot of things that are mainstream.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of things in religions, outside of religions, that Swedenborg's writings have influenced the people who did that. So it could be that part of if the way that Swedenborg gives it is going to always be a real limited appeal, just because of the nature of it. It could well be that the thing in Providence it's meant to do is inspire all these other big changes in society, which it's had a hand in. So I don't know, maybe a combination of all three. I'm not sure where the future of it is, but I'm sure that whatever, it seems like a very potent tool in the hands of the divine, and I'm sure it's being deployed the way that it is. I do think that some of it's limited by people's receptivity, for sure. Like if more people were open to it, it would be in more hands and in more hearts. But I'm sure it's destined to do something. I don't know exactly what that is, but something good. All right, let's keep going. We got another question. This is from Steve M., who asks, any thoughts on what Swedenborg might have thought about the theory of evolution? Darwin was born after Swedenborg's death. If evil results from humankind turning away from God, it seems that animals brutally killing and eating each other prior to Homo sapiens would suggest a pre-human fallen state for the world. I've had the thought that perhaps humanity's bad choices might not only affect the future, but in some ways rewrite the past, if creation is a kind of simulation. So, yeah, it is perplexing, because Swedenborg does talk about the root of evil, and even goes into talking about predation and violence in the animal kingdom, traces its origin back to hell. But yeah, you can find fossils of spiders from hundreds of millions of years ago, and they were not vegetarians. So what's going on with that?
Yeah, it's a great question, because there's this great story that Swedenborg tells in True Christianity, the book, that where he sees all these animals and trees and birds and plants all around this angelic community. And he says that these things are all just a reflection of the thoughts and feelings that are going on in this community. And then he says that's how things on earth came about. In other words, almost sort of going against the literal sense of the creation story, to say that instead of animals coming before humans, the humans came first. And he says that on earth, the people had thoughts and feelings that took animal forms, but the difference is that they had reproductive powers and they just kept going. And it's such an interesting idea that sometimes I think, wow, so somebody felt a rhino at some point, somebody felt a hippopotamus, or that was a feeling that someone had, and it still exists. And he also says the astounding thing that in the spiritual world, creation is still going on. Now, as with some of these other things we've been talking about, evolution too was not a thing in his day. He seems to at least nod sometimes to the idea that the Earth was only 6,000 years old, which was a widespread view, even though he himself had discovered fossils that were really, really ancient. So if you pinned him down, I don't know if he would say, well, that's just what everybody says, or did he really think the world hadn't been around that long? But the idea of ongoing creation was kind of against a general view that God sort of went poof, and then all the animals existed. But he definitely says that that's going on in the spiritual world, and that's where our flora and fauna came from originally. But so someone asked me years ago, so where did dinosaurs come from? Like how did were the people? I think one possibility, just making things up, but there's more and more discoveries going on of how much more ancient the human race is on this planet than people thought. And so there might have been whole cultures 200,000-300,000 years ago on the planet. Now millions of years with the dinosaurs. Who knows? I don't put anything past the Lord.
Yeah, but I think that Steve, has a good insight here, which is that to the Lord, all the past and the future are present. So there's no, even for angels, I was just reading that the more angelic they get, the more their present contains past and future. So yeah, the idea that the Lord has foreseen how everything was going to go, because he's got the ultimate algorithm, and he knows all the probabilities and things.
True.
So could well be that the eventual choices of the human race were there and had an impact on the way that life evolved on Earth. Swedenborg also talks about how there's life on other planets in the solar system. It could be there's different timetables there, that Earth, kind of came later after that. But
That's right. That's right.
Yes, so I think there's any number of interesting possibilities. I feel like when I think about the history of life on Earth, which I I was studying biology for a while, so I like really grown fond of a lot of the different forms of animals that have sprung up and died away. And I just think it must be like a full registry of all the different things that exist in God. Obviously, there's infinite things, but that the period in which the fossils indicate that there was mostly amphibians ruling the world. There's that's something in the divine and what it is, and then the reptiles, and as well as probably being a since everything's holographic for Swedenborg, it's probably a representation of the processes that go on inside individual people, that you your own feelings and thoughts take this same sort of journey. So I'm not sure with a bunch of specificity, but I would think it's either that the human race is bigger and older than one planet, or that yes, that to the Lord all future and past is present. So it could well be that the negative choices we have made now did it sort of, you could say, ripple backwards, but it would be by a different mechanism than that.
Yeah, I love it. There's all thoughts that I've thought before, because it is an interesting puzzle. And the best we can do, since Swedenborg doesn't address that directly, but does talk about this connection between, the human mind and choices and nature, the animal world, we can only play with it. And just one other thing that I agree with what you guys have said. I thought about human race could be way older than we think, could involve other planet human races. But this is a new one to me, this maybe reflecting backwards in time, One other thing that I wondered about, because of a passage in Secrets of Heaven where Swedenborg talks about that, how human beings were created to be this unique connection between heaven and earth, just our kinds of human minds. And when we get back to that, when we get to that state collectively, it'll enhance nature even more.
Yeah, that's right.
And that made me wonder, could there have been if some animal forms appeared on this planet before humans, did they not yet have that human mind connection, getting more heaven flowing into it? This is just crazy, playing around with it. But that was another thing that made me wonder about. It'll be a great thing to ask about when I cross over. I definitely want to ask about what's that all about?
I know we're up against our time, but the tame animals all seem to have come from the same place that the human race originated.
Interesting.
That whole Jared Diamond, is it? I forget, but the Guns, Germs, and Steel. But the animals, the the goats, the sheep, the horses, and so on, they all came from places where humankind is supposed to have originated. That's just interesting to think about.
Wow.
Maybe there were other animals, but then the humans did sort of somehow lead to these
Gentler.
human adjacent and human helpful animals.
The lion will lie down with the lamb.
I was just thinking that eventually, maybe that will be that the diets will change. Lions won't need to eat meat anymore. They become just the noble versions of
I don't know. I just saw a play version of the movie Madagascar, and there's a big crisis there about like this lion needs to eat. He can't just be friends with his zebra. So who knows?
Yeah.
On that note, thank you everybody for submitting the questions. Thoughtful, good, probing, interesting questions. Hopefully you took something away from this that is helpful to you in some way. Karin and Jonathan, thank you. That was so fun to get to hear your wisdom on all these topics.
Oh,
Thanks,
thank
Curtis.
you so much. Yeah, thanks everybody. We didn't get
Thanks,
to all the questions, but we will save them for next time.
Yep. We don't want to rush them, so we want to give each one its time. So that means we have a limit, but we want to do right by the people who are asking. So yes, we will get to yours next time. For members, we're going over to the live member community chat right now, so you'll see a link in your email. We'll see you there. All right. Thanks for watching.